the surprise decision has left the government reeling.
Almost 100 asylum seekers being held in immigration detention, many of them for years, could be released after the High Court ruled the federal government's policy is illegal.
3 murderers and several sex offenders are among 81 people who've been freed from immigration detention.
This issue has always been a live issue, and every minister, including myself, had to deal with the issue of indefinite detention. The Prime Minister's been asleep at the wheel, and what's happened? 81 hardcore criminals have been released into the community.
It's been 3.5 months since the Leader of the Opposition last held a press conference in Canberra. It is usually government ministers who become more elusive with the years when it comes to Canberra press conferences, while opposition leaders, who normally struggle for some airtime, are relentlessly available to journalists. What got Peter Dutton out today has been brewing for a week.
The Prime Minister should not go to APEC until this issue is dealt with. Let's be very clear about it. Foreign Minister can represent the Prime Minister at APEC. The Parliament this week should not rise until the government comes forward with legislation.
The High Court ruled last week that indefinite immigration detention is unlawful. It has been the practice of governments, backed by previous High Court rulings, to place people who it has been deemed should be deported, but for various reasons cannot be deported, in indefinite immigration detention. That has included people sentenced for crimes in Australia who may have finished their sentences.
The High Court had held back in 2004 that people who are stateless could be held indefinitely, that is for the term of their natural life without prospect of release, because they couldn't be sent to another country.
Last week's High Court ruling surprised many and created a legal headache and a political nightmare for the government.
The High Court of Australia has made a decision. The Commonwealth Government argued that these people continue to be kept in detention. I wish that they could be kept in detention. If it was up to me, I would keep them in detention. I can't do that. The High Court has made a call. They have told the government what to do. They issued a writ to tell the government to release these people from detention last week.
The Albanese government complied with the High Court writ. It says it has now released 83 people into the community, of the 92 identified as being possibly affected by the ruling. But the politics of the issue has been framed by the Dutton coalition for some days. It's an issue that touches all the opposition's favourite attack points: border control, law and order, a charge that Labor is soft on these issues, as well as arguing the PM is spending too much time jetting around the world, and, for good measure, that criminals are being paid welfare.
Can the Minister advise the House whether any of the 81 hardcore criminals released into the community following the High Court's decision last week were released into the community without a visa?
Are any of the 81 hardcore criminals receiving taxpayer-funded accommodation now they have been released into the community?
Will the Minister confirm how many of these 80 individuals are convicted pedophiles, murderers or rapists?
Can the Minister confirm the Albanese Labor government is now paying welfare payments to the 81 hardcore criminals?
It's clear that for members opposite, they will play politics with absolutely everything. With absolutely everything.
The government's position until today has been that it would be highly risky to try and address the issues raised by the decision before the detailed reasons for the court's findings have been published.
The idea that it is open to the Australian government to simply legislate away a High Court decision is not how our Constitution works.
That was then, though, about 8 o'clock this morning. 5 hours later, reports began to emerge that the government had had a change of heart. And then, in the Senate,
that the government intends to introduce legislation shortly to further respond to the decision of the High Court, and we look forward to the opposition's support in that regard.
I would always be very cautious about rushing through legislation without all of the necessary information. I think changes certainly need to be made, but they need to be made in a considered fashion. And I would imagine it's extremely important to wait for the High Court to pass down its reports. And my feeling is that rushing anything through now could actually cause more problems than it may ultimately solve.
The risk of proceeding now is firstly that it's possible it will be ineffective, that it just isn't necessary in light of what the High Court decides. It might also be that it's unconstitutional. It might also be perhaps that the gap is larger than we expect, that further legislation might be needed. It's possible that the most effective response might actually require state legislation. And it's actually the states who typically deal with detaining people after their sentence is finished, if, for example, they're convicted of a sexual assault or other sex-based crimes. So it may be here state intervention is required.
The political brawl over what to do next got even more willing in the House this afternoon.
Prime Minister, don't leave Canberra and don't leave this parliament until legislation has been passed which will give effect to providing safety to the Australian people, because what is happening is these people with significant criminal records, having committed significant rapes and assaults and murders against Australian citizens, are being released into the community, and you stand condemned.
He said that we should have prevented people from being released, prevented a High Court decision. Having stood in here day after day, week after week, month after month and said, you've got to respect the Constitution. You can't change the Constitution, because if you do, you can't out-legislate it. That's what he said. That's what they all said in Justified.
Order.